Good evening and welcome to the Grace Talk. Our topic today would focus on inner city ministry and challenges. The inner city is where hopelessness, homelessness, substance abuse, and poverty come face to face with the grace, love, and power of Almighty God. My guests today are on the front lines of inner city ministry, and they bring us their stories. Please join me to welcome Pastors Floyd and Nancy Wheeler to the Grace Talk. Welcome to our show.
Thank you so much. Thank
Happy
you.
to be here. This is exciting.
You guys are just two of my favorite people, and I love to have you here. You're just inspirational, and I love your ministry. So tell us about yourself.
Praise God.
Wow.
I'll let you start.
Well, Nancy and I have been married for 45 and a half years.
You must have started when you were like 5 years old, right?
That's what she tells everybody.
I'm going to have to go younger than that pretty soon.
We have 3 adult children and 8 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren.
Unbelievable.
Yes, it is unbelievable.
It is.
When I look at you, 3 great-grandchildren,
Yes.
that is the goodness of God right there.
It
That
is.
is
God
the
is
blessing
so
of
good.
God.
It is.
Yeah. And it's His mercy and grace to keep us from a lot of things, to keep us to this point where we can be where we are today, and to allow God to use us in such a way.
So talk to us about that, right? So she talked about where you are today. So tell us a little bit.
Yes.
You know, this is your family, 45 years of marriage. What a testimony.
Yes.
Yes.
And then continue from there. You guys are now in Delaware. Have you always lived in Delaware?
We have not always been in Delaware. Nancy and I are both born and raised in Philadelphia. After we came to the Lord and God called us into service for Him, we started ministering in Germantown, Philadelphia, where my dad was a pastor, and our ministry was really on the street, on the streets of Philly, working with young people and children. And after a lot of prayer, fasting, asking God what to do, we began to see children and young people come to Jesus.
Yes.
Later, we began to see their parents come to Christ. And my introduction to really being around a lot of people who were substance abusers were not so much the kids of that day, but their parents. Back in those years, there was a heroin addiction or epidemic in Philadelphia, and a lot of their parents, these children's parents, were hooked on heroin, alcoholics, and so on. And we began to see many of those parents come to know Jesus Christ.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
When I want to just speak first to us coming to the Lord, because there was a starting point for us. And as a young preteen, someone introduced Christ to me on my level. So we can never discount young people sharing the gospel. My next door neighbor would go to church and she would invite me, would you come to church with me? So I started going because it was an opportunity to get out of the house and to ride in a car in Philadelphia. We didn't need cars. We took public transportation everywhere, but it was my opportunity to just go for a ride. And then I started hearing the gospel, and that was good enough for me. And one day she sat down and she said, do you know Jesus as your Savior? And I said, well, yeah. And she said, well, how do you know? I said, because I go to church with you. And so often people think going to church is enough, and it really isn't. You know, you have to have personal relationship with Jesus Christ. She led me to the Lord, and that was my starting point. And I often hear the song, I used to, you don't hear it anymore. It says, when the Savior reached down for me, He reached way down for me. I was lost and undone without God or His Son, but the Savior reached down for me. And I would have been one of those young people running up and down the street, lost, with no salvation, no opportunity to hear the gospel. But a young person shared that gospel with me, and that started my life. So I decided I wanted to know more about Christ and grow. And that's how it started for me.
Yeah.
See, that is a tremendous testimony. Look at her and God reaching you when you were young.
Yes.
And so you've had your entire life
Yes.
to serve and to give to the ministry.
Yeah.
what a just a tremendous, trophy to the
That's it.
grace and goodness
Yes.
of God.
When Nancy and I started doing ministry together, it was before we got married. We were only 3 to 5 years older than the kids on the street corners we were ministering to. And I want to sort of springboard off of some of what Nancy said. I was in church all of my life. Dad a pastor, my mom just a precious, saint of God. But you hear the gospel and you don't hear the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
You go to church, but you're just going to church. I want to go see my cousin, and so on. But it was a person from Nancy's church, went to separate churches, from Nancy's church, who reached out to me. And 2 to 3 days a week, he'd be at my house. I'd come in the house after school, and there he was. Come to church with me. Nah, go to church. He was relentless until the Spirit of God, I sensed the Spirit of God pricking my heart. It was a Friday night, I'll never forget it. A Friday night at my house, in my bedroom, when I gave my life to Jesus. People win people.
That's right.
And this man, who was maybe 4 years old, who is still in my life today, who is about 4 years older than me, came constantly sharing Jesus with me, showing me the love of Christ instead of the roughness that was on the street. I saw the love of Jesus coming from somebody instead of that kind of life.
That is a wonderful testimony. So, even though you were pastor's son, you went to church. It was the relentless grace of God that really, that guy wore you down.
That he did.
He just wore you down.
Yes.
And God drew you there. So we can't take it for granted that if you're in the church, that you are saved. You're not. And that was what you were saying, Pastor Nancy.
Yes,
That
yes.
you have to have a personal
That's
encounter,
it.
personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And it's a beautiful story. You on your own, God drew you through a young
Yes,
person. You as
yes.
well, somebody just a little older than yourself.
Yes.
And if you're watching us today, that's a challenge. If you're a young
Yes.
person, God uses young people.
Absolutely.
That's right.
God has continued from the scriptures up until today. God uses young people.
Yes.
Do not discount yourself. It
That's
doesn't matter
so
how
true.
young you are. God can use you. Look at the lifetime of service and faithfulness that these ministers have given to the gospel. Because 2 young people
Yeah.
risked their reputation and came after them again and again and again.
Yes.
And through those young people, God drew them. What
Yes.
a rich fruit,
Yes.
fruitfulness, your entire lives given to the
life.
gospel.
And it wasn't just me. I was the only one in my family of 5 siblings and a mother and a stepfather. I was the only one going to church. And by me going to church and hearing the gospel and accepting Christ, then my mother decided she wanted to come to Christ. And then she brought the rest of the family in. So my family knows Jesus and is saved because one person, one young 13-year-old young girl on her level shared the gospel with another 13-year-old, and all of this is a result of that. So it's just God moving in the hearts of people, and he doesn't count age.
That's right.
It is at any age. And then Floyd growing up in a Christian home where they all went to church, but still Christ needed to come into the life individually
Exactly.
to bring salvation.
Exactly.
So when we're on the street today, catapulting ahead a little bit, being on the street today is normal for us. We grew up in a community in Philadelphia. So being in Wilmington, there's a lot going on. We're in Wilmington, Delaware today. There are gunfights. There are fights on the street. There's cursing and alcoholics everywhere. But we're okay there because
Absolutely.
we know Christ.
Yes.
And we know the boundaries that we have around us and the protection. So I've jumped ahead, but I'm going to go back and let you talk about how we got here.
You're going to let me talk?
I love you.
Yeah.
Well, it's 45 years of letting him talk when I'm ready.
We ministered at my dad's church for about 10 years after I got saved. And at age 28, Nancy and I went into our first pastorate, a small Baptist church just outside of Philadelphia, in the suburbs of Philadelphia. We ministered there for 7 years, 7 years and 2 months. And after that, we resigned from that ministry and planted a church in the same general area and led that church for 22 years. At the end of that 22 years, the Lord spoke to both of us and said, it's time for you to leave here.
Yes.
And honestly, I said, all right, leave and go where? He said, it's time for you to leave. And after about the second or third time, I said, okay, leave and go where? God said, mind your business. Your business is to leave. So I said, okay. And we gave our church a 6-month transition time. It was a church we planted. Nearly everybody there were people who we led to the Lord, or they came and grew under our ministry, began to do ministry under our leadership. And so we gave them a transition time, and eventually left. Nancy was working. I went home and said, okay, what do I do? And for 4 months, I'd get up in the morning, pray, go through the day praying and doing various things, saying, God, what do you want me to do? And he led me to the Sunday Breakfast Mission in Wilmington, which is a rescue mission. It's a Christian shelter and mission for men, women, and children. And I didn't go there for a job. I went there to get somebody else in the mission. As a resident in that mission, I knew somebody who was having a tough time, addicted to drugs. I knew that mission was there. So I went, spoke to a friend of mine who worked there and said, you have space for this guy. In our conversation, he said, Floyd, do you want a job? I said, doing what? He said, being a counselor. And I said, I'll pray about it. Even then, that was 7.5 years ago. I was thinking, look, I've been in ministry a long time. I've had a long journey, even back then, a long journey. I've gone too far and have too little time left to make mistakes, to just jump at something, even though I needed the income. And I said, I'll pray about it. As I was leaving the building, the president of the mission saw me and said, Reverend Wheeler, I understand you resigned from your church. Do you want a job? And I said, I'll let you know. I'll pray about it. So 2 weeks later, I came back with a resume. Long story short, after I finished talking to the president, I was talking about the ministry Nancy and I had been involved in, even ministry we were doing along with our church in North Wilmington. He said, I have a place for Nancy. He didn't offer me a job. He said, oh, I have a place for Nancy. And I laughed, and I went out to my truck, called Nancy, and said, I have another job for you.
And I said, I was not looking for a job. Well, I want to back up and say, when God speaks to one, he speaks to the other. And he actually spoke to me, I guess, about 4 years. He impressed on my heart, 4 years before Floyd actually offered his resignation, that we were leaving. And I said, Floyd, I think God's calling us out of the pastorate. And he said, okay. But really, it really didn't click. So it took time, but I was in agreement with it. It wasn't one of those things where one person makes a decision and the other has to go along with it. I knew it was okay. And, I told him I'm fine with that. I was doing a chaplaincy, a resident program at Christiana Hospital as a chaplain. So I was coming to the end of that term when he came into the Sunday Breakfast Mission and decided that he found me a job.
Here's something else. God's provision. We resigned from the church, and a couple of weeks after we resigned, we left from home, the chairman of my board called and said, Pastor, I'd like to sit and talk with you. I said, sure, what's up? He said, well, can you come up? I want to talk to you. So I set a date, went back to Pennsylvania because we were living here in Bear, Delaware. Sat with him, we were talking, he pulled an envelope out of his pocket. There was a check in there. I said, what's this for? He said, it's severance. We resigned from the church, and the church board said, we're going to give our pastor severance. Nancy looked at it. This was early on. Nancy looked at it and said, she looked at our budget. She's my accountant at home. She looked at it, went to our budget and said, this will last us 4 months. Almost exactly 4 months to the day I started working at the Sunday Breakfast Mission.
Yes.
Wow.
God's provision.
God's provision and guidance.
Yes.
And he told you to leave, and when you asked him, he's like, mind your business.
That's right.
Just do exactly what I told you. And then he gave you enough provision for the time that you were not going to be working.
That's right.
Yes.
How
Yes.
great is our God?
Yes.
And if you're watching us out there today and God is speaking to you to do something, what you're hearing is that you can trust him.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
If God is leading you, he will provide
trust
for you.
him. Yes.
He will provide for you. Don't worry about it. They didn't worry and God provided. You already resigned.
Yeah. I was
They
gone.
came to you and gave you 4 months
Yes.
Yeah.
bills paid.
That's right.
And at the end of the 4 months, God brought you to Sunday Breakfast
Yes,
Mission.
yes.
So tell us about that. That was kind of the beginning of your inner city ministry in Wilmington.
That's right.
Okay.
When Nancy and I started working at the Sunday Breakfast Mission, I felt at home. I said, this is the kind of ministry I did, or the kind of people I was surrounded with when I was in my late teens and 20s on the streets of Philadelphia. Boy, I'm at home again. And so we began working there. For the first several months, both Nancy and I ministered to people that came in for about 3 days a week. We shared the gospel with them. We saw so many people come to know Jesus. And we gave away, the mission gave away food, clothing, and furniture. And those people who came in for food, clothing, and furniture, if they wanted to hear about Jesus, we shared Christ with them.
Yes, our purpose was to share the gospel. And we would, I was working a few days a week, and Floyd was working there also. We shared a job. And the job was to share the gospel. And I thought, Lord, you've called us into another place to continue ministry. And sometimes I would sit there and I think, who gets to share the gospel as their job?
All day.
All day. As people come in, they would come for food, as Floyd said, food, clothing, or furniture. And we would talk to them. And at some point we would say, may I share the gospel with you? Who is Jesus to you? When you die, do you know where you're going? What do you think? Everyone was going to heaven. When we talked, everybody was going to heaven. And when we said, well, what do you think Jesus is going to say? They would say something like, you did pretty good, or you're not as bad as the other person, or you really tried hard. And at that point, we could open the scripture and share the gospel. And so many people came to Christ just through giving out those necessities that they had. And that's what God called us to do. And I was blessed. And sometimes I walk away and say, God, how did you provide such a job as this? And we met people that were homeless. We met people that were in need. So we were comfortable sitting and talking with someone and not talking down to them, but really having a heart to share with them. And that's what we both did.
And as a matter of fact, Nancy and I worked off of one paycheck. We shared a 40-hour week for a period of time. And there were those who would say, no, I don't want to hear about Jesus. And we would say, okay, let's get your box of food or your furniture or whatever the case is. There were no restraints like that. If they said, no, I don't want to hear, let's get your food for you.
And it's important to be sensitive to God speaking to you, because there are times when we would sit and we're human, we were just like everybody else. We don't have this armor on that says, I'm going to share the gospel and this is great and wonderful, but we would feel, when someone would look at their watch and they say, okay, is this going to take long? And I would be struggling. God, I want to share. My job is to share the gospel. It's not to give them the food. It's to share the gospel. And they don't look like they want to hear it. They're anxious. They want to get done. And I would say, may I just take a minute? And when I'd say, who is God to you? So often I see them just break down and start crying. The enemy will not want me to share the gospel and be intimidated, but just plowing ahead and saying, I got to do this because this person needs to hear the gospel. And that would be the very person that prayed to accept Christ.
I think Nancy has a little more evangelistic persistence than I do. I really do. We would be driving down the street in North Wilmington. We would see someone in the street. We had a Bible study before we went in Wilmington before we went to the Sunday Breakfast Mission. And she would see somebody on the street sitting on someone's steps, maybe drinking some liquor or open can of beer. Oh, they weren't in Bible study today. Pull over. And I'd pull the car over, and she'd jump out. And she would just love them. She would simply love those individuals. And so what a blessing. What a
That
blessing.
is a wonderful thing, and many things that you guys have said really strongly resonate with me. One is to be faithful where God has placed you. And it's a beautiful thing to see the journey, how God brought you guys from you were on the streets, in Philadelphia. That was where you started your ministry.
Yes.
Yeah.
You went to a church, you pastored for a season. God said, this season is over.
Yeah.
And he didn't tell you where you were going because maybe you might have said no.
Yes.
So he allowed you to
Yes,
relax for
that's
4
right.
months.
Right.
And he set you up in
Yes.
another ministry, different from a church, but now interacting one-on-one with those who need the Lord.
Yes.
And there again, you were in full-time ministry,
That's right.
That's it.
That's
giving
right.
food with one
Yes.
hand and giving the gospel with the other hand.
Yes. Yes.
To
Absolutely.
God alone be all the glory.
Yes.
And Pastor Nancy, your faithfulness, your dedication to say this person needs Christ,
Yes.
even though on the surface they're very brash and
Yes.
very shutting down. But
Yes.
God give me an opening,
Yes.
and God honors that.
Yes, he does.
And that person who appears to be the most
Oh, yes.
unreceptive is the
Yes.
person who needs Christ the most.
Yes.
That's right.
Exactly.
So now you're in Sunday Breakfast Mission, both of you, right?
Yes.
Back again in street ministry, ministering
Yes.
to the inner city. So talk to us. Are you still there now, and where are you now? What has happened between that time and now?
7.5 years later, almost 7.5 years later, I am still there. Nancy retired 5 months ago.
Yes.
About 5 months ago.
Well, we call it retirement, but God actually just told me to step away. And I've been with him too long not to hear his voice and do what he called me to do. And he said, I want you to step away from the Sunday breakfast mission. And I thought, Lord, I love my job. I love my income. I love what I do. And he said, step away.
I enjoyed her income too.
But God is so faithful. When we do what he tells us to do, we don't miss anything. And I tried to bargain with God. I was like, well, God, I went to the president of the mission and said, the hours are strenuous for me. I'm 60 plus years old now and I need to slow down. And he said, well, let's go part-time. So when he said that, I went out and I said, God, we're going part-time now. Is that good enough? And the Lord spoke to me 3 different ways, 3 different times to let me know, step away from your season there is over, step away. And I had to honor that. And as I said, I'm just amazed at how God has blessed us. I'm still involved with the Sunday Breakfast Mission on the periphery, in that we've started a ministry right in Wilmington with residents from the program that have graduated and haven't connected with a church. Because we're dealing with a community that has addiction problems, they have history, they've severed a lot of relationships. So going into a church for a person like that is difficult. Many of them may not have been in church for years. And just stepping through those doors are intimidating. So we saw the need to have a place where they could come and be refreshed and be healed. And to men. Wasn't my will, wasn't my desire, because when God said step aside, I was like, whew, this is good. But what actually happened was God spoke to Floyd and told him.
Well, let me back up a little bit. When we got to the mission for about 10 months, both Nancy and I did the same ministry, the same job position, where we just shared the gospel about 3 or 4 days a week with people for several hours. About 10 months into this job, the president of the mission, Reverend Tom Lehman, asked if I would consider becoming the director of men's program. And I gave him the same response as I gave him several months earlier when he asked if I wanted the job. I said, I'll pray about it. So I said, Reverend Lehman, I'll pray about it. I went back to him later and said, I'll do this. I'll do this. The Sunday Breakfast Mission has different facets. It has a family shelter for women and children, and a men's shelter. Again, obviously for men. The men's shelter, the part that I direct, has three major facets to it. It has an overnight shelter that's just a shelter where men come in. They come in for dinner, for a shower, a chapel service. They go to bed at night. They get up very early in the morning, have breakfast, and they have to be out by 6 a.m. Now, when the men come in, the men from the community come in for dinner, women and children come in as well. And so every night, 365 days out of the year, we serve men, women, and children dinner. After that dinner is done, the women and children leave and go to wherever they're living. A few go next door to the family shelter as overnight guests. On average, we have about 115 men on average who sleep overnight in our building, who are not in our residential program. So we have one facet is the community meal, where all these folks come in from the community to be fed. Another facet is our overnight shelter program, where homeless men come into our program and they sleep overnight, have dinner, shower, breakfast, and they leave the following morning. The third facet is our residential program. And these are men who decide to go through a fairly rigid program of work therapy right there in the mission and for the mission, classes of every type, counseling, both group counseling, individual counseling, and those who complete the program are there for a year to a year and a half, going through that rigor. We have seen so many men give their lives to Jesus Christ. And out of our graduates, so many men who stay free. And that is a blessing. It's a blessing. So that is, in a small nutshell, that's what I'm doing now. I direct that ministry. God has blessed me with a staff that runs that ministry 24 hours a day, 365 days out of the year.
And as Floyd said, when they come through the program and they graduate, then that's when I was speaking that it's difficult for them to make that next step and to transition back to home or transition to the next phase of their life. And we developed Lifeline Church Ministries, which is in Wilmington, right in the heart of Wilmington, to give them a place of safety and a place where they can continue to grow outside of the Sunday Breakfast Mission.
Nancy asked me a moment ago to kind of share how that started. Well, as Nancy said, some of the graduates had not connected to a church. And I was concerned about that. One of my counselors in particular was very concerned, and you know him, Joe Anisi, was very concerned about it. And he approached me, and I said, well, why don't you start a Bible study? So he started a Bible study. I went to Reverend Lehman first. Oh, there's the backdrop to this, and I'm not going to elongate this, but the backdrop to this, I was sitting with Apostle Dave Carey and Pastor Nancy. About 2 years prior to that, and Apostle Dave said, Floyd, I hear you have a heart for Wilmington. When he says things like that, say, uh-oh, okay, he has something going on, there's something going on there. And what he asked at the end of our lovely meal that he fed me, if he feeds you a meal, say uh-oh also, okay. But at the end of that lunch we had together, he said, why don't you start a church? That was 2 years prior to us doing anything. I said, I'll pray about it. He said, write a plan for it. I said, when do you want it? He said, take your time. And so I did. I said, as God spoke to me, I wrote. A year later, I came to him and said, I've written a strategic plan. At that point, I sat down with Apostle Dave and with Pastor Chris Rue. I sat down with them, shared it with them. They said, great. When are you going to start? I wasn't ready to start. I just wrote the plan.
And I wasn't ready to start because my plan was to move to South Carolina. I would be closer to my grandchildren. However, There's no place I'd rather be than in God's will.
Amen.
So writing the strategic plan, Apostle Dave and Pastor Chris saying, when are you going to start? It dovetailed with Joe and Nisi saying, we need to do something for these men who've not gotten connected. So Joe started a Bible study, and I asked Reverend Lehman, the director of the mission, if we could have a class there at the mission for these guys. And so once a week we did. It expanded, so we did one there and one at Joe and Nisi's house. And it kept expanding, and Joe said, I think we need to have a Sunday afternoon service. These men need to really gel. And I said, well, go ahead and do it. And he said, well, they need a preacher. I said, you're ordained. Go ahead and do it. And so out of that grew Lifeline Church Ministries.
Yes.
There's one common thread, and I've been listening to two of you. There's a common thread. Waiting on the Lord, hearing what God wants you to do, and being obedient.
Mm-hmm.
That is one common thread, and I've listened to the entire story from the beginning when you started a church. You know, you were there, and God said it's time to leave. And you said, okay, where next? God says, don't worry about that. Let me worry about it. And you left. God provided for you those 4 months.
Yes.
At the end of the 4 months, God took you to Sunday breakfast mission. Says, here's your new mission field. And you began to serve there. And at the right time, God spoke to you, Pastor Nancy, and said, it's time to step away.
Yes.
And you figured, let me negotiate a little. We girls do that a lot, right?
Yes, we do.
To negotiate with God. And you're like, God, is it going to be okay if I just make it part-time?
Right.
Let's do this 50-50, God. And then you walk away and you told him, I almost laughed when you said that, God, we're going to be part-time now. And he's like, no. No. I told you to step away.
Yes.
And then you obeyed him and stepped away. And now God has birthed a new ministry, actually a church, ministering again to people on the street. The love of God. This is where you started.
That's right.
And you thought you retired from Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And here God is at work again.
Yes.
But let me tell you, looking at someone, looking in, what I see God doing in your lives is amazing. The joy that you have, the life that you have, there's a zest, there's a passion and a zeal.
Yes.
When Pastor Floyd is ministering, he's alive, he is ignited, he's going.
Yes.
And this is a time in your life when people are retiring, but you're on passion for God.
Yes.
And I've talked with you guys privately. God is doing amazing things in your lives. It's like, what is coming next? He's promoting you.
Yes.
He's positioning you guys. He's blessing in so many ways.
Yes.
And all because you are obedient to God.
Praise God.
And follow God when he says, get up, move. You do that.
Right.
And trust him to order your steps.
Right.
And he's done that. Right. And the ministry of Sunday Breakfast Mission, until I began to talk to you guys, and I've been there several times to volunteer, but I didn't know how involved the ministry is. I didn't know how detailed the various facets that you just described. What a beautiful work of grace that the Sunday Breakfast Mission is doing. And Reverend Lehman, wow.
Yeah.
The work that ministry is doing in rescuing people from the streets. I know that Wilmington is a tough place, but imagine if the Sunday Breakfast Mission wasn't there.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Imagine the void that would
That's
have been
right.
created. So it is like a safety net for people. At least they can come in for dinner. Whole families come in for dinner. People can come in there for overnight stays. And these might be people who are actually working, but they don't have enough to
That's
afford a
right.
hotel
That's
or a
right.
home. But they stay there. They have a place to come in, sleep, shower, and be able to go to work.
Exactly.
What a blessing the Sunday Breakfast Mission is. And God bless you, Sunday Breakfast Mission. Now I feel even more involved in coming in and volunteering because such a beautiful work. And now, Lifeline Ministry. So tell us where you guys are in Wilmington, Delaware, and your website address.
Well, we are at 408 East 8th Street. Actually, it's 8th and Lombard. So if you're coming into Wilmington, you're going to enter our building on Lombard Street at 8th. and we're positioned, our door is positioned a little to the side, but there's always somebody there to greet you. We're there Sunday morning at 11 a.m. and Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Wonderful Bible study, wonderful worship. Today was just off the hook.
Oh, boy.
It was amazing. God met us at Lifeline Church Ministry, and we are right there. You know, we're getting people that are coming through, and we had two new partners today
Yeah.
that said, I saw so many children on the street. We need to grab those children. Yes, we do, because it's a hard place. And children today aren't like they were when I was growing up. They didn't have the family, and they didn't have all of the security that they don't have that today that we had growing up. But my heart goes out, because when I see a young girl going down the street, I think, that was me. That was me. A young girl carrying a baby, that could have been me. But God rescued me. Now it's my job to help rescue someone else, to just love them. We are so excited when people come through that need to hear the gospel. As Floyd said, we did ministry a while ago in Wilmington. Before we came to the Sunday Breakfast Mission, we were doing a Bible study because we just had a heart for Wilmington. And we had a couple come in. They were in their 60s. One Friday night, we were just giving out sandwiches and clothing and playing music. And the couple came by and they said, we heard the music and we came in. We were getting ready to go buy some drugs. And we thought we would come here instead.
That's right.
To hear people
That's right.
that are hopeless and have nothing to look forward to, we're able to throw that lifeline out to them and give them an alternative so that they are not just groping in the dark. And that's what we want. We want to love them into the kingdom.
Yeah.
So we're there trying to meet the needs. There's parking. God did another amazing thing right in the heart of Wilmington.
Yeah, where do you find parking in a city like the city of Wilmington?
Free parking.
Free
Off the
parking.
street.
Yes.
Off the street, free parking. Yeah.
So we have the accessibility there. We have the visibility in the community and the people settlement. We're meeting there Sunday morning, as I said, and our website is lifelinede.org. So you can pull us up, www.lifelinede.org, and just shoot us a line. Let us know that you heard us today. You know, we just want to meet the needs of the people.
I can tell you, as I was listening to you again, to God be all the glory. Because the passion that you guys have to work in a place, the inner cities where people are afraid.
Yes.
There's a lot of fear. You know, the sound of gunfire is normal in the city. But you guys are there. You are in your 60s. You are having a lot of fun.
Yes.
They are ministering to the lives of so many people. It is just a tremendous testimony of God placing you, divine placement.
Yes.
Because there's no better place, the safest place to be is in the center of God's will.
That's
I was
it.
going to say something like that. The fear I have is when I know I'm not in God's will. If I step a little bit to the left or the right, well, caution, get back. But being in God's will doesn't matter where we are. Doesn't matter. It's good. It's okay.
Yes.
And another thing that strikes me, if you're joining us right now, we are on set with Pastors Floyd and Nancy Wheeler, the pastors of Lifeline Church in Wilmington, Delaware. Inner City Ministry. They're tackling that ministry. They're facing down the challenges and they're winning.
Amen.
Praise
They're
Yes, sir.
winning.
Yes.
They're bringing souls back to Christ.
Yes.
That is just amazing. The thing that really strikes me is when you mentioned that Pastor Nancy will be driving down, you guys will be driving down. She will see someone and say, oh, that person needs Christ.
Yeah.
This is a heart for the city.
Yes.
This is a heart that God has placed in you
Yes.
guys to reach the city. And the love of God. Talk to us about this. And the reason I asked the question is, you know, there are some people who don't look like us. There are some people who don't, you know, have earrings in places that I wouldn't put my earrings in. There are people who have tattoos. And sometimes if you don't come from that background, it can be a little intimidating for
Right.
church folks.
Right.
Sure.
So how do you guys deal with that and love them through the differences?
You know, for our church, it's natural. For our church, it's natural. God has blessed us with a congregation, and everybody wouldn't see it as being blessed. God has blessed us with a congregation who's been there and done that,
That's
and
right.
some are doing it right now. And so when someone comes in who doesn't look like us, they're embraced because nobody's shocked, nobody's surprised, nobody. I remember when I gave my life to the Lord, I was very young, but I had a beard. You know, it just started growing fast. One of the first things I heard was, "Boy, you need to cut your beard off. You got saved, you don't look saved. Cut your beard off." I'm thinking, I was wondering, what does that have to do with me coming to Jesus? Because of where so many people in our congregation have come from. When people come in who do not look exactly like this or that, they are embraced, they are accepted, and nobody says, "Take this off, cut that off, change this or change that." And I'm not saying the urge isn't there all the time with a couple of people, because that's okay,
Yes.
you know. But we're trusting God that people will grow into what He intends for them to be. And even when people grow into what God intends for them to be, they may not always look like you and I. And that's fine, because there's somebody out there like them who need to come to Jesus.
Yeah, and so often we say, "I couldn't do that. I can't," and it's okay. The city isn't for everybody.
Yeah.
But if
Good.
God gives you a heart for the city, then it's for you. Now there are places I don't want to go. You know, I've never wanted to do foreign missions. And Floyd has gone to Haiti many times. And I told him, I never want to, I don't have a desire to go. I would like to stay here and pray for you. So I understand that when someone says, I don't have a desire for the city, but I'll pray for you because it's for that particular person, for that ministry. So we're all different. And we're all made differently. So for me to go into the city is okay, and it may not be okay for someone else. And Floyd has gone to different doors and knocked on the doors where we know something's going on. And I guess you can speak to that. When we were giving out food on Friday night in Wilmington, we would have cups of soup and sandwiches, and he would take them around the neighborhood. Places I wouldn't think.
Not everybody's going to come to your Bible study. So I guess one night a week we would serve hot soup, stew, chili. And I was passing out flyers, and I knocked on a garage door. It sounds strange, but I knew there were people there doing strange things. So I knocked on this door, and I always tell people, I knocked on the door, then stood to the side. And these folks had met me prior, a couple months before, and they yelled, "Who is it?" I said, "It's the Rev." That's what they called me. It's the Rev. So they opened the door. I said, "Come on to Bible study tonight." And they said, "Oh, Rev, we can't come like this. They've been doing their thing. We can't come like this, Rev." I said, "We have some chili and some fresh cornbread. I want you to come and get some." He said, "Another time." I said, "So I'm going to bring some to you." And they said, "Okay." I went back, had them fill up some bowls with chili, cornbread, took it back around the corner, knocked on the door again. "Who is it?" It's the Rev. They opened the door and saw me with this big tray of chili and cornbread. And these guys, some drug dealers and other things, smiled, thanked me. And from that point on, when they saw me on the street, it's, "Hey, Rev, how you doing?" And they became open to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ simply because we were kind. Didn't act afraid. It was, again, when God has you where He wants you to be, there's nothing to be afraid of.
And Jesus meets the need. He went to where the people were. And he said, "I'm not coming to the well, I'm coming to the sick." And that's what he called us to do, to go out there and show love. Because we can talk all we want. And we can go open our church doors, go in, do our thing. come out, close our church doors, and never speak to anybody. They don't see the love of Christ in that. And we have to show Christ. And if we're showing Christ and his love, he's got a protection around us. He's going to cover us with his protection. And we don't have to worry about that. All we have to do is be real and show the love of Christ. Coming from a background where I was in a home where my stepfather was an alcoholic, I saw that. So I feel when I see children that are coming out of a house where their parents are staggering and walk, they may not have eaten, they may not have gotten any love or anybody to care for them. So our hearts are there to those individuals that have real needs. And we can't do it in ourselves. We can't meet the needs, and we know our limitations, and we're not stupid. We're not going to go into the wrong place on purpose and not know that God hasn't called us there.
That's right.
But we know that if we do what he called us to do, he's protecting us. He's got our back. We're covered.
We are rounding up our show today with the Wheelers, but I can tell you I have been tremendously challenged listening to you guys. And I would go back and think about it, but I would love to be a part of your soup handing out.
Amen.
And cornbread, because that's really what Jesus would do.
Yes.
Jesus touched the lepers.
Yes.
He did not isolate himself. These people said, if you will, you can make me clean. Look at the woman that had the issue of blood.
Yes.
He touched her and called her daughter.
Yes.
This was a woman in that
Yes.
society who would have been an outcast.
That's right.
Nobody would have associated with her. But that's who Jesus was. And you guys are modeling that right close to us here in the city of Wilmington. And I'm telling you what a tremendous, for me, challenge and encouragement to be all that God created us to be. Yes, I may not be I'm not called to be the pastors that you guys are, but I can come alongside and I can support you guys in whatever. And if you're watching us today and what they're saying touches your heart, you can be like me. You can support them financially. You don't have to go there and knock on those doors that Pastor Floyd is knocking on.
No.
But you can support them financially. You can support them praying for them.
Yes,
You can support them by sending a person who needs help
Yes.
in Wilmington
Yes.
to that church to say, hey,
Yes.
there's a lifeline for you right here.
Yes. That's
right.
There's free food.
Yes.
And you guys are going to tell us when the free food is, right? There's free food here in this church. Another way that you can help them is, again, to visit the church
Yes.
and worship with them on a Sunday. So thank you guys. This is just amazing having you here. The work that you do is a blessing. Just listening to you and the passion that you have. And again, at wonderful time in your life, you are investing yourself.
Yes.
Praise God.
Again in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Yeah, you could have been in North Carolina, but look what you would have missed.
That's right.
All these wonderful people. And also, I believe that you're being retired from Sunday
Yes.
Breakfast Mission. God is also giving you the opportunity to visit your
Yes.
grandkids a little bit more, right?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So I am blessed to have you guys here. God bless you. And again, we'll probably have you guys, back again to tell us the growth. Because I have been to your church. I visited
Yes,
there, but I plan now to come and do the cornbread thing, right?
Amen. That's right.
Knock
That's
on
right.
doors. That's what Jesus would
yes.
do.
Yes.
And that's what Jesus called us to do. And I believe that if Jesus was here, he would be in places where we wouldn't expect him to be.
That's right.
If Jesus was here, guess what? Many churches would not open their doors to him because he probably wouldn't look like the rest of us.
Yes.
He probably would have earrings and hair colored, purple
yeah.
and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Or tattoos, because
Yes.
that's where Jesus would go.
Yes.
Right.
Where the need is.
Yes.
And that's where he sent you guys. And we applaud you. I support you. And I love you guys for the work that you're doing. So we have come to the end of our show today with Pastors
yes.
Floyd and Nancy Wheeler. What a delightful couple, serving the Lord all their years. I mean, these guys truly represent Psalm 92 at every stage of our lives, being fruitful like the palm tree.
Praise God.
That's what I think about when I see you guys. Every
Thank
stage of life,
Praise
being
God.
fruitful and investing yourselves in the ministry. God bless you. And for folks who are watching us today, this is the Grace Talk. Thank you for joining us. Good night, and God bless you.